Já, góða kvöldið, velkomin í Raunveruleika. Við erum hérna með hjá okkur Sæþór Benjamín Randallson, verkalýðssinni, matráður að mennt og smiður og það fram eftir götunum. Hann hérna kominn frá Bandaríkjunum fyrir þó nokkrum árum síðan og við ætlum að hafa þennan þátt á ensku vegna þess að hann enskur native speaker, eins og þið segja, og ég býði velkomin. Hi, Sæþór. Good to have you finally. We've been talking about doing this show for quite a while.
Good to be here.
So you were educated as a chef?
No.
No?
No education. I actually went to university to be a 3D artist, and I had a previous career working in video games and movies. And how I initially moved to Iceland was a high-tech visa based on my work I did for CCP.
I remember you telling me about how brutal the video game industry and probably many of these, tech companies are.
No security, no unions, very like young men have to be very loose without roots to move around and chase the work.
Yeah, be able to move around at the smallest notice and stuff. I heard the other day that in the United States, like under 10% of the workforce is in a labor union.
But it's going up again.
Yes, it is, with Amazon and Starbucks. It's great to see. Hopefully it'll develop. Why is it so important for people maybe who don't know? Why is it so important to have a labor union or some sort of leverage?
Well, so when you don't have a union, you have to hope that you yourself are valuable enough to the company that you could leverage that. And then even if you do it, you're just one person. So one of the companies that I did work with in Los Angeles, had I never quit and left, they were the team that made this alternate history where it was set in Afghanistan. And in reality, the Americans actually murdered several hundred civilians, but they changed it in the video game to be the Russians that did it. And so for a lot of American teenagers, this will be their only exposure to what happened in this war. So this was just war propaganda. And they had to spend like weeks and months making the characters and the tanks and the movements and all of this. And I was thinking, if I still worked there, I think I would probably have had a problem like making this, like sleeping at night, making a heroic Oliver North, who I consider a war criminal, and having to meet him and carefully sculpt his face to be younger and handsome again. I would have been like, no. But then I thought, what kind of leverage would I've had? I could ask for a raise, but I couldn't say no to war propaganda versus like with a union now that I have one, when I haven't been asked to make war propaganda for the city of Reykjavik, but maybe that's coming in the future. But when I've had things I found untenable or questionable, I had the union to work with or talk with, so it was much different. And I actually tried to form a union or build an appetite for unions, or even I one time tried to lead a group action, like spontaneous, against management, because we all knew we were not being treated right. This was actually here in Iceland. And none of these ever like worked out. So I had like this longing for a more organized, formal way to like request things from management, the boss, the person signing the checks. And so my attempts went poorly, but now that I'm like part of Epling, like they've gone a lot better. So like, yeah.
Have you've been working with Epling for quite some time now? Many years, or just since Solveig Anna took the lead and won the elections? You've been with her?
Well, so I made a voluntary change to go from video games to work in the welfare system. So I went from having no union but very well paid and benefits and low like demand in terms of stress and time, to like all the way down the ladder to like the lowest paid job class. So I was just in Epling by default. And then I heard this like, we're going to go on strike. And I was like, I've always wanted to go on strike. So I showed up at ISNO, and like there were pre-made signs on one side, and then you could add your own, and we had ideas, and there was coffee, and we were all getting ourselves amped up, and then we went in City Hall with the sign, and we're like, and we're not at work, and we're here, pay us more. And that was like very, like as crazy as being able to be really nonchalant about my homosexuality here in Iceland as a change from the US, to like have a union be like, come on, strike with us, and like smoothing the way for me to participate was like a mind fuck. But, you know, we won that strike. And then since then, I was asked to participate on the council, which I've done since January 2021. And then when I was asked to run on the B list with Solveig, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And she was like, are you sure? This is, you know, don't say this too lightly. This is going to, you know, be a lot of work. I was, no, I understand. Sign me up. Yeah.
It was, you had been longing for something like this, like, you know, workers rising up together and having some sort of power that they can you know, press on the authorities or on their bosses. Well, so it happened pretty organically.
It was very lucky, very organic, but in my like research of how unions have gone and past labor movements, the capital class of Iceland and the US has been very focused on diminishing the reputation of unions. Like this is in the crosshairs of anyone who has thousands of employees or like a rent extracting industry in their pocket. Is unions bad? Because these are the ways that like these things can be more even. So it tells me if this is one of their enemies, one of the things they're always trying to put to bed, then this must mean that it has some worth and some value. And when it has been put to bed, the workers' rights and benefits and the overall quality of life goes in the gutter. And then when the participation is high, they're much stronger. So like correlation isn't always causation, but I'm kind of like,
yeah, it seems that when you know, the labor unions start to have this organic outreach and people power, you know, in the streets, maybe protesting and strikes, actual strikes, and then the labor leaders are unacceptable to the powers that be. You know, it seems like they want labor union leaders and labor unions in general to just follow, you know, a formula like with Salak. Just have the set rates, and we just want to keep it like that. And can't we all be friends?
So I read a really fascinating book that was called People's Movements: Why They Fail and How They Win, or How They Win and Why They Fail. And they were tracking all these people movements, even like trying to make abortion illegal, which now is more salient than before. But and it was just kind of like, you know, when do they fizzle out and when do they accomplish their goals? And in this book, the two authors claim that more of the like wins and raises and benefits for labor in the North America came before the unions were formalized.
Really?
So people were doing like the spontaneous like sit down, work stoppage, strike, Blair Mountain, whatever, before there was any unions or union halls. And as they were more and more formalized, that's often as they became more and more ineffectual, like there was kind of like a partnership in terms of like defanging them. So
it's very interesting.
Yeah, the unions are like a good organization, but the energy has to, and the participation has to be present. It's not like, sometimes the cart can be before the horse.
Yeah, the managerial system is maybe not what you need for it to be successful. You know, you can't be reliant on a couple of powerful people in the correct positions. And also, one can imagine that it's easier for capitalists and the authorities or powerful interest groups to influence these, you know, single leaders and people in managerial positions. You see.
Yeah, because we don't have any supermen. None of our leaders have laser eyes.
Exactly,
so like, you know, when you see in the past, there's, you know, a movement with some success, there is a leader, but they always had, you know, masses of people and a lot of popular sentiment and like people who were also putting in the work like all the way down the line. Yeah, so there's got to be some real sentiment. And this book also, between that and just all my other ideas, it seems like the last time we had a real labor struggle and an all-out class war between capital and the working class, one of the takeaways afterwards was to stratify the workplace and create all kinds of layers of management and a kind of bribed middle class that can tolerate a lot of suffering and poverty as long as their position is preserved. And so like all of these systems, they kind of, change and evolve over time. And so that was their like way of kind of salting the earth and putting union activity to bed. So like now to reawaken dormant labor movement, whether it's Iceland or the US, it's, it's going to be different. It's got to be bold. It's kind of a lost dark art because, there's a reason the trend lines for the working class and the fees for basic services are not going in like positive human rights-based directions. So there's got to be some like course correction. And the last time we had the lines going up, there was a lot more militancy. There was some more communists.
Among the socialists and among the labor unionists and so on, and just workers and people who were rising up, like that book is saying, right? What matters the most, it seems, is to have organic people's power. People need to press on the capital interests and the authorities for them to be able to get something through. Is that happening now in the States? Can you tell us something about that? Like Amazon, Bezos has been fighting against the unionization of his workers for a long time, but
yes, there's been some good successes with Chris Smalls and also John Deere, and one of the whiskeys was on strike. The Hollywood IATSE union was on strike, famously walking out the day before what's his name shot the person in the face, like the actor. The union actually walked off the day before saying, this is so unsafe. None of you guys know what you're doing with stunts or weapons. We're going to leave before someone gets hurt. And they kept filming the next day. And that's when the shooting happened.
That was with, I can't quite remember
his name. I can't remember his name either. Well, everyone knows.
It was supposed to be a prop gun, but it turned out to be a real gun.
Yeah, the union had left the day before going, we're not going to put our name on this because you guys have no idea. But I was actually only recently learned that when Marx was doing all of his writings, he didn't just kind of have the, generic capitalism, bad, unsustainable, socialism / communism, more sustainable. He also had this theory of like how we would move potentially organically from one to the other. And the precarity was like this ingredient, the fuel of like people's willingness to do risky things. And so the United States specifically got a lot of rewards from their petrodollar world hegemony after World War II, their 30-year fixed mortgages in suburbs and kind of leave it to beaver bribe to the middle class. And now that like is either unsustainable or they're not doing it anymore for whatever reason, it's going away. And so like the amount of people who are not able to provide basics, they don't have like a dignity to life, are going up. And so when someone comes like and says, hey, there's unions or there's strike power or there's the ability to keep people from being evicted, or like we don't have to do everything the police say, these ideas become more acceptable than when everything had like this thin veneer of sustainability of the 80s or 90s. Yeah.
When people start to feel it more on their own skin, when the situation gets worse, they're being more ruthlessly exploited. The social services are getting worse, deteriorating, and maybe it's it's life or death if you go into a union or not, or if you're able to raise your wages a little bit.
Yeah. Well, they're having, just like we have here, the federal bank is waging a all-out class war on the working class by raising interest rates, because this is something that they get to do without public debate. It's not an elected office. This changes the cost of borrowing for businesses, which causes smaller ones often to go out of business because they can't afford the hike in debt cost. They get swallowed up and consolidated, which makes everything worse for bargaining power and how the regulatory state works. And then the rate also for people's like basic goods goes up, and oftentimes then they have to loosen the ownership of their house or their car or something else. And this also gets gobbled up. So every time these manufactured recessions happen, it ends up with like a huge transfer of wealth to the exact people who said, cause a recession. And like within the United States, they're having to do it much more piecemeal, and with unions that are kind of like just kind of being put back to functionality, or even being formed whole cloth out of nothing, like with Starbucks or Amazon.
Brand new.
Yeah, so we have a little bit more like a rich history and a little bit of experience. So I think if we can, also get serious the way now, like. I just learned also that when Caterpillar, the tractor manufacturer, had their last strike, the workers who were on strike drove up into the gated neighborhood where the management lived and threw caltrops up into the driveway. These are these pieces of metal that no matter how they fall, there's a spike poking up, so that when they back their luxury SUVs out of their, giant drive, they would like get flat tires just to like add pressure and harass and make it like have a seriousness to it, which I thought was kind of badass. But
many people would like scoff at this or think this is like way out of line. You're destroying their property, or you're being an ass. But I feel like people are misrepresenting, or they're not making enough out of the daily violence that is exploitation. Where you're at starvation wages, month in, month out. Having to feed your children, go to school, and pay for healthcare services, and so on. Well, they're just taking all the profits for themselves.
If you can abstract it even one step away, then you can like have a plausible deniability. Yes, Libya is a failed slave state where you can buy human beings and it's destabilized, but the levels between that and Hillary Clinton are like 5 or 6. So who's to say? Versus, when someone does an actual like stabbing or a punching or something like that, you see the direct connection to the violence. So I don't think we have a good connection to this, because there is like, I bike past the Reykjavik campgrounds for my job all the time. And I know there's people who aren't tourists that are like residents of the city that like have to live there because that's their only place that they have, which is outrageous. Like, it's really just ridiculous. And I consider that violence. And there are people that work at Sæþór Benjamín and work in the business association and like set the rules of how the labor market works and how housing is going to be allocated, who are directly benefiting and living luxurious lifestyles, who I consider like that violence is on their hands, but we don't really recognize it like that with our current framework, the way we do things here.
It reminds me of the case like shortly after the economic recession here in 2008. There was a man who lost his house, and he went and threw some paint on one of the banksters' houses. And he did it repeatedly. And many people were outraged, but I think most of the people were like, yeah, you bastard, you deserve it. And he actually wasn't prosecuted, so.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's the same, I think, with einelti, what's it called in English?
Bullying,
where you might see a kid like explode at his bullies, and some people might take that as like, oh, this kid is crazy, but don't see the violence that has been ongoing for maybe weeks or months or years. And so maybe we need more depth and perspective, and maybe this is what class consciousness is about, where you see how the upper levels of society are exploiting us, are causing us violence.
And you have to have the like reading the trade winds, like if the public sentiment isn't there to support whoever is kind of like being the first to stand up. So like when the mermaid statue was first put out in Tjörnin, it was like blown up like 2 or 3 times. And every time the police were like, oh yeah, I guess we'll go tomorrow. And we didn't find anything, versus like, then you see, journalists being arrested for phone issues, like what, how the priority is. And versus, say, John Brown in the U.S. So I'm from Virginia, and John Brown was a white Virginian who took up arms and radicalized his family and tried to essentially free a bunch of slaves and go around and just like murdering away the institution of slavery.
Wow.
And he was just mowed down by either the FBI or the local sheriff or whatever, and that kind of like put it down. People didn't like, yeah, we were waiting to join you. They were just like, we're all still in support of slavery.
Oh man.
Yeah, so he didn't really read the room. I still credit like, you know, if he
That's
did the right
heroic.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we also, we very rarely get to learn about a lot of the history, because if we say, oh, the paint on the house, oh, that's too far kind of thing. But like, why? Who says? The guy whose house it is? Of course.
Yes.
Like also before abolition in the US, there was a group of young people called the Wide Awakes, and they had open eye as their iconography, and they were so young that they all grew mustaches so they wouldn't be ID checked at like voting booths, because they would go out and try and vote en masse to try and abolish the institution of slavery. But they were 20, 22, so everyone thought they looked young, so they would grow the mustache. And they would go in the middle of the night with these canes that had oil lamps on them, and they would have to have oil slicked capes to keep the oil that might slosh out from like on their clothes. So it was like this awesome, you know, iconography, like oil slick capes, oiled mustaches. They had hats on and these oil staffs, and they would go to the giant lawns of the pro-slavery politicians in the middle of the night with a full brass band and wake them up and their neighbors.
That's
to
badass.
Like wake them wide awake to the immorality of the institution of slavery. And like, I had to learn this from Wikipedia. This was not in the school system or in any of the, like, you know, what about Martin Luther King's ideas of passive, you know, don't bother people too much or too little kind of thing. Not that that ended slavery, but I still think it was pretty badass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I heard the other day that in Virginia they're like outlawing history to a certain extent, where, you know, you're teaching some historical fact, and I think the Republican governor and the Republican administration of the state wants to, you know, keep the history motivating, I guess, or beautiful, and so they're trying to make teachers teach false history of events, so they can keep the myth of American exceptionalism, I guess, alive.
Probably that. I mean, I got my education in Virginia in the 90s, so well before this law, and I got complete mythology. I had a Bible class every day and had to take time to go to chapel because I was in a private school. I didn't get sexual education. I didn't get American history, really. Like, we didn't really cover the slave trade. We didn't really cover the Native genocide. It was kind of like there, but not really. You know, we didn't learn about Russia's participation in World War II. America ended it all by themselves. Yeah. Stalin who? And, you know, it was a very, like, strange and empty version. And now that I look back, it was a class exercise. This was a private, expensive high school. And so it was extremely white, even though my city was half black, and it was all wealthy people's kids. So it wasn't that you needed to learn anything. It was to form a network with other wealthy people's children so that when you became an adult, you had the right social connection to be paid well. You didn't need to know anything for that. So it was a very empty within the school system. But in the one thing that pushes me towards like participating and being in a union or wanting to participate in a political party is in the United States. They used to have two opposing parties, the Republicans and Democrats. And after the 80s, the Democratic Party was really able to be captured by the capital class so that it still advertises itself as an oppositional party, but it doesn't accomplish anything. And so there's so many Americans who have sentiment or ideology that they would like to do that would move it in a much better human rights direction, but they have no route to like meet each other, make plans, talk about things, harass a politician, go on strike. You know, it's all so diffuse. And even if they get ideas like Black Lives Matter or abolish the police or whatever, they're often just like immediately co-opted. And the latest Black Lives Matter project is a collaboration with UGG boots, you know, the ones that had the fur on them that were in style for a while ago.
Like luxury consumer items and fashion.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
You were like Kylie Jenner's Pepsi commercial during the summer protests. Yeah. So like they're very, they have no real options. So now like these unions are building back up, that the people I know in the States, they feel like without any kind of route to like work on these things. They have a lot of feelings and ideas that they want to do, and they know like these are not good directions, but they're like,
yeah,
what do you want me to, I voted for Democrat. That's what it was supposed to like make things better. And we're still like,
yeah.
So what now? Oh, again, vote Democrat in 2 years. Oh, okay.
It's pretty scary. Thinking, like,
nothing else,
happen?
No other projects between now and then.
Yeah. Democrats have failed time and again.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it true that when Obama was elected, he had like a supermajority in the House and the Senate?
Yeah, he totally could have done all the things that he promised.
Mm-hmm.
Universal health care.
Oh.
If he had, gone and bullied Lieberman the way he did Kucinich to keep the drone program going, he could totally pass universal health care. Like when Roosevelt passed the Social Security Commission, the Supreme Court was like, no, we're going to rule that illegal. And he goes, then I'll add justices until I get my way. And they're like, okay, you can have it. And like that Biden was specifically chosen as like, I'm not going to change anything, not going to be any regulatory, no sweeping bills, no opposition. So there isn't any kind of petition on offer to like fight for these things. And there's also no organization to then be like, okay, well then, it's like Obama had a list of, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people when he won in 2008. Mm-hmm. That would have been the time if you go to do a universal health care and Lieberman goes, I don't want to vote for it, or Republicans don't want to vote for it. Email all of them. You live in this person's district. They don't want to give you health care. Here's where they live.
Or at least, pick up a phone and get people activated.
Yeah, if you had an opposition mindset to like really accomplish these things, he could have said, I'm Barack Obama. I want to pass universal health care. I have all the votes except for one that I need it. This is the person who doesn't want to vote for it. We're having this international press conference. I want to give you health care, and this person does not want to. Now it's their turn to explain why they don't want to give it. Yeah, there's so many tools that could be used to like, accomplish things. And if you just take like excuses and excuses and excuses and don't have any kind of like line in the sand or follow after. I thought it was interesting when there was an interview here with Sanna, and she was asked like what was most surprising. And she said that these parties would vote together as a bloc, even against their own policies.
Ideology.
Yeah, and I'm like, but that's so simple to do because no one pays attention in between. They want someone to offset the role of governing or legislating or paying attention to what's happening in between those 2 years or those 4 years, and then they can be more individually focused. Mm-hmm. And that's not sustainable, but it's on offer right now. So we can have these like very selfish lives that don't include following along what's happening, trying to divine what's necessary or where your time should be going to or what's really happening. We can have like these very self-obsessed lives in the West with modern day capitalism.
Sure.
But over time, like in the United States, that's what they did. No gardening, no participation, no reading about foreign policy, looking at like track record of policies, involvement, anything. And so it's very easy to fool them. It's very easy to have like things that are all just theater while the important things are going unremarked on in the background. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of that happening here. So I think it always gets harder to course correct. So if we're going to end up where they are now, because I'm like, I don't even know what you would do if you were in America and you wanted to be someone. If you had a path to unionize, okay, that would be pretty clear. But otherwise, like
what's the like thing you can do to try to course correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, revolution, but against the U.S. government, good luck with that.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like it's like a likely thing for progress. Yeah. But yeah, I'm saying like if you were trying to get politically engaged in the United States, like would you have to go to some Republican or Democrat convention, or are those your basic options?
I mean, they try and they present a lot of fractions, like say the Democratic Socialists of America is supposed to be the very left-wing version. I haven't been very impressed with what's happening. There is a Socialist Party and I have a friend who lives in Seattle, Washington, who has started to participate in the Socialist Party with Kashama Swant, who's sitting
doing great.
Yeah. I saw a great picture from the Recall Sawant party. It had Recall Sawant on the wall, and it was like just 3 people with their solo cup of beer on a couch, because there was like a capitalist-funded attempt to remove her from and the only people they managed to get there for the free beer were like 3 very like.
Can you maybe tell us about her? What's her name again? I've just been reading up on her like lately, but she campaigned on. She's a socialist in Seattle who campaigned on raising the minimum wage, and she had the entire Democratic Party machine going against her. But still, she managed to raise the minimum wage and so on.
So I think there is a genuine appetite for someone who is not just lying, essentially. You know, when you get someone who actually says, "Here's what I want to do." There's a chance to be a politician, a union chair, a boss, whatever, and then they kind of prove themselves like that. This is something I believe in. And I don't know what her initial election pitch was, but she's been sitting now in the council, and all of the good legislation that has come out of Seattle has been like her thing that she ushers all the way through the process. And she says herself, it's her and 7 Democrats. There's not one Republican on the city council. It's 1 socialist and 7 Democrats. And she'll bring something like rent caps all the way through. They'll do no help whatsoever. And if she can get it on the table as a resolution, they know that if they vote against it, it will be terrible for their optics. And they're like,
they're in a bad position.
Oh, fine, approved. But like they would never bring it themselves. It has to be 100% her work and her party doing it, and the whole time they're trying to gaslight her and tell her that these are crazy ideas and they'll never work and they can't happen. And so she has to go back and like get invigorated and strength from like the group, because she doesn't have laser eyes. She's not a superhero. She's just like the person who volunteered to do that.
I think the Seattle city councilors are supposed to get $90,000 to $100,000 or $120,000 a year in wages. She's reduced her wages to $40,000 a year.
How is that even possible in Seattle?
That's way below the median income. I think the median income is like $60,000.
Yeah,
she's I think using just those funds to finance the campaigns. Mm-hmm. I think she wrote that when I just read up on this the other day, when she got elected, 2 Democratic councilors came into her office and were like, "Okay, congratulations, but we're just here to tell you that you're never going to get, the 15-hour minimum wage. You're never going to get these rent controls or anything. We run this town, and you just have to like fall in line. We'll be friends. It's okay, but you're never going to do this and that." And then like 2 months later, they raised the minimum wage. They told her she couldn't, but that's because she seems to have been able to galvanize popular support and get people on the streets and sending emails to the councilors and so on. It's very important.
She has a really great way of speaking. Whenever I've heard interviews with her, it's very clear, very direct, not flowery. Like, I like it.
That's how we want our politicians. Straight, direct, and then we're going to do this and that, and then they do it.
and very clearly goal-oriented. Like very little is about personalities or excuse making. It's like, this is we did this on rent, and we want to do this next thing on rent, and we want to do this on housing, and
that's how it should be.
But I draw some lessons from. So I feel like the effects of capitalism on a society is very formulaic, and it goes through stages. And the U.S. is much further along. It's like the 4-disc Lord of the Rings set, and they're on disc 4, and we're still on disc 2 or 3. We're like speed running it. We're double speed. Let's see the orcs and the ants and but like it gets so extreme that in Seattle they have an incredible homeless population of people who don't have housing, and yet they're the headquarters of all these incredibly valuable companies: Starbucks, Nintendo of America, Boeing, Amazon, Microsoft. Like all these places that bring in incredible amounts of money are there. And so she passed this, managed to get basically by herself this head tax, where all of these super valuable companies would pay an extra amount of tax per employee that they have, and all of that money would go to some kind of homeless building shelters service kind of thing. Passed it. The capitalists were so upset at this, they just spent what they needed to get it. I forget what the way they had it repealed. They either did like a popular vote where no one showed up but the people they paid to, or they bribed the politicians to overrule it. But within like 2 months, it was gone again. Because like the capital just, and within that city, you can see where the employees of these companies live, and they have giant houses. They all have new model cars. Their fridges are full. They have insurance on everything. Their kids have braces. They have healthcare. They have lives of dignity. And then you just look across the street, and there's people who are living in tents and abject squalor. And you're like, this can and should be equalized. You have a person who comes and does it, and then capital can just go and reverse it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's gotten to be where like they have so few tools to fix it. Yeah, this fuels me to participate in the unions or the various projects here, because that's their projects are so much worse and more of an uphill battle, because the previous generations bought the lie that you don't have to do that anymore. Like, end of history, everything's got this nice equilibrium. Capitalism will arrive at a good moral end result. Yeah, over time.
Yeah. And so the sooner we course correct, the better and the easier, you know, that's what you're saying.
But it's not going to be easy. Yeah, it's very difficult, but it will be harder tomorrow and harder. Yeah.
When their power structures are more, you know, powerful and harder to change, like it is in the States.
Yeah. And I think we have like a quite unique time right now in Iceland coming into the contract negotiations, because there is, in my opinion, a very strong union leadership that has like worked together and built some like good plans to come into this. And there's also that popular sentiment, like the bulk of society sees the prices haven't gone up, sees a petitioned government not really doing anything. Like, so if someone comes along, like right now, the tube strikers in the UK, you can just watch them at this incredibly antagonistic media trying to goad this guy who has the patience of a saint, you know, dealing with their bullshit. And I'm like, do you think this is landing on the average British consumer? Do you think you have demonized this guy for asking for like basic quality of life from these? We see them every day, how the wealthy are waltzing around in luxury. Like, who are you trying to build sympathy with?
Talking about the labor leader, Michael Lynch. Right?
Yes.
I think it was Piers Morgan, some dude on the English media.
Imagine.
He was trying to say, why did you put up a profile picture on Facebook of you as a villain? Don't you know this character is a villain? And this is just what he's actually asking him, like on primetime TV slots, you know, what?
Oh, Piers Morgan.
It's demonization.
To be asked, like, okay, we want you to go on Piers Morgan, and he would have to think, okay, lots of people watch Piers Morgan, but to go on there, I would have to talk to the man. I would have to be in the same room as him. So it's like,
it might get a little hard.
Yeah.
But I'm glad he does. I'm like, I think it's important to try to breach those spheres. Maybe there is an argument also.
He's also quite interesting, because oftentimes when someone comes along with the same ideas that he has, but doesn't have this like stone resolve, has any kind of excitability whatsoever, then right away the sycophants of capital go, ha! That's how you know they're wrong. They got upset. They got angry. That's how they're wrong. We don't have to talk about what they were saying. That person was aggressive or used a slur, or that was how when Jesse Jackson and Bill Clinton were vying for the nomination in 1988, they have what they now in the political circles call a Sister Souljah moment. And Sister Souljah was a rapper activist who participated in this big civil rights roundtable with Phil Donahue and Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and several other like big figures. And was this, I loved her, but they caught like a sentence of hers that out of context sounded like, kill Whitey or something like that. And they just like blasted and smeared Jackson with this kind of idea. So they had that like, that one thing was they were able to banish all critical thought or ideas or like logic kind of thing. So he has this like incredible resolve and calm, and no one gets his goat. He's never gotten upset, but there's still exactly as antagonistic. So I'm like, I knew it wasn't the tone. You just don't like the ideas he's saying.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with like, well, why Michael Lynch put up a profile picture of like this villain as a joke to his friends. This is everything to do with that you're trying to represent the working people's interests. And Piers Morgan is a shill for big capital and
whether he knows it or not.
Yeah, whether he knows it or not, exactly. Well, Sæþór, thank you very much. It's been a very fun conversation, and we'll probably have you on here again.
I would enjoy that. Yeah, the last thing I want to say, I really enjoyed being able to tune in before we had our, we had to go to the Starfsgreinasambands Íslands in Akureyri, and I was one of the electorates sent from Efling, and the only bit of media that covered anything about that was Samstöðin. So I got to listen to Þórarinn and Vilhjálmur talk about why they wanted to be the chair, and then go in, and I was one of the people who had to cast a vote between those two people. And so without this interview, I would have been like, well,
yeah,
he has a nice smile. Okay, this guy.
Vinniskurinn has been doing a fantastic job, and even you know, Samstöðin covered the elections in Efling just recently, and it's pretty sad, like how the other media aren't doing it at all, because it's not that difficult if you just get to the task. You know, these big media outlets like Rúv and Stöð 2 and so on, they should be able to do it. But if you want to hear a thorough and good debate between the labor union representatives who are going up against each other in elections, you should come to Samstöðin. But we'll definitely talk to you better and cover it as well as we can, like throughout the process and what's going on.
Yeah, exciting year.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sæþór. Og takk fyrir áhorfendur, við heyrumst síðar. Gott kvöld.